Hello there, and welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan, and together we're going through the books of the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year. We'll be dividing them up into little portions, the traditional Jewish portions of the week. Today is going to be Genesis 19:21 through 21:4. So a little bit longer today, but we're going to be reading from the Robert Adler translation. Robert Alter. Sorry, I said Adler. Robert Alter. And he said, I grant you a favor in this matter as well, and I will not overthrow the town of which you spoke. Hurry, flee there, for I can do nothing before you arrive there. Therefore is the name of the town called Zoar. The sun had just come out over the earth when Lot arrived at Zoar, and the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord from the heavens. And he overthrew all those cities, and all the plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew in the soil. And his wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham hastened early in the morning to the place where he had stood in the presence of the Lord. And he looked out over Sodom and Gomorrah, and over all the land of the plain. And he saw, and look, smoke was rising like the smoke from a kiln. And it happened when God destroyed the cities of the plain that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out from the upheaval as the cities in which Lot dwelled were overthrown. And Lot came up from Zoar and settled in the high country, his two daughters together with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he dwelled in a certain cave, he and his two daughters. And the elder said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on earth to come to bed with us like the way of all the earth. Come, let us give our father wine to drink, and let us lie with him, so that we may keep alive seed from our father. And they gave their father wine to drink that night, and the elder came and lay with her father, and he knew not when she lay down or when she arose. And on the next day the elder said to the younger, Look, last night I lay with my father. Let us give him wine to drink tonight as well, and come lie with him, so that we may keep alive seed from our father. And on that night as well they gave their father wine to drink, and the younger arose and lay with him. And he knew not when she lay down or when she arose. And two daughters of Lot conceived by their father. And the elder bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moab to this day. And the younger as well born a son and called his name Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the Ammonites of our days. And Abraham journeyed onward from there to the Negeb region and dwelled between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said of Sarah his wife, She is my sister. And Abimelech, the king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. And God came to Abimelech in a night dream and said to him, You are a dead man because of the woman you took, as she is another's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, My lord, will you slay a nation even if innocent? Did not he say to me, She is my sister? And she too said, He is my brother? With a pure heart and with clean hands I have done this. And God said to him in the dream, Indeed, I know that with a pure heart you have done this, and I on my part have kept you from offending against me, and so I have not allowed you to touch her. Now, send back the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will intercede for you, and you may live. And if you do not send her back, then know that you are doomed to die, you and all that belongs to you. And Abimelech rose early in the morning and called to all his servants, and he spoke to these things in their hearing, and the men were terribly afraid. And Abimelech called to Abraham and said to him, What have you done to us, and how have I offended you, that you should bring upon me and my kingdom so great an offense? Things that should not be done you have done to me. And Abimelech said to Abraham, What did you imagine when you did this thing? And Abraham said, For I thought there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. And in point of fact, she is my sister, my father's daughter, though not my mother's daughter, and became my wife. And it happened when the gods made me a wanderer from my father's house that I told her, This is the kindness you can do for me. In every place to which we come, say of me, He is my brother. And Abimelech took sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he sent back to him Sarah his wife. And Abimelech said, Look, my land is before you, settle wherever you want. And to Sarah he said, Look, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. Let it hereby serve you as a shield against censorious eyes for everyone who is with you. And you are now publicly vindicated. And Abraham interceded with God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his slave women, and they gave birth. For the Lord had shut fast every womb in the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. And the Lord singled out Sarah, for he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the set time that God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised Isaac his son when he was 8 days old, as God had charged him. So there's a couple of different accounts here. I think the method behind this particular portion was that you get the birth of both Lot and Abraham, and the next generations and the contrast between them. I think that was the idea behind the construction of this. There's a lot of material to go through. It begins though with the closing of the Sodom and Gomorrah account. And what are some of the things that come to mind as they're leaving, particularly the pillar of salt? I always found that very interesting.
Well, first, I'd like to mention that back in Genesis 18, verse 19, is a very important passage regarding Abraham, where God says, For I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the eternal, to do righteousness and justice, that the eternal may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him, the importance of passing on the heritage to your children, to your grandchildren, and so on. It's a very important theme in the Bible, and something that Abraham, in fact, what you have in Genesis is unique. You do have four righteous generations. You have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. You have four, four clear, evidently four tzaddikim, four righteous people. Um, Regarding the account here, well, there's a symbolic message here. Obviously, they were reluctant to leave. The men had to drag them out, and then they were told, "Don't look back." And she looked back, and you know there are even accounts in recent times, for example, pre-Holocaust accounts, where people maybe who had the chance to get out. Now a lot didn't have the chance. You have to understand, for some people there was no option, but there were some who might have had a chance to get out and didn't. And maybe if they had been more attuned to some of these examples, they would have seen, hey, there's real trouble ahead, and we have a chance to get out. We should take it. There are proverbs on that too. I want to say something else too, if I may, and the symbolism of this. I want to go to the Gospel of Luke in the 17th chapter, and here we're talking about the Great Tribulation period, and when it's very clear that if you're in Jerusalem, you need to get out and get out fast. And Jesus says in Luke 17:32, "Remember Lot's wife." Mm-hmm. So again, the symbolism of that, there are times to just get out and not look back.
When it comes to the pillar of salt, what comes to my mind from an artistic perspective, because obviously God could have chosen any sort of thing, so why particularly salt? This is what I get out of it is this. So just hear me out. This is my little aside. What I get out of a pillar of salt is kind of like when you have Jesus referring to the idea of, keep your hand to the plow and not looking back. And also when Jesus is talking about we're the salt of the earth, and if we lose our saltiness, we're good for nothing, right? So if you think about it from a progression perspective, right? They're at Sodom, they're going uphill, right? They're progressing, and she turns back. So that stops her spiritual progression, and all that's left is that indication of that, her religious progression. It froze. Her saltiness froze in that spot. She was not able to continue any further. And especially if you think about how salt is used in comparison to the earth, right? They used it for fertilization processes and things like that. So, and the fact that we're just dust. So if you think about it, it's like the dust was gone and all that was left was just the salt. So it's almost like saying your spiritual progress just halted. It did not make it far enough. It just froze. Anyway, that's what I get out of it. What do you think?
That is an interesting observation. Of course, the area now has become famous for salt. We have the Yam HaMelach, the Salt Sea, that we call in English the Dead Sea, but in Hebrew it's the Salt Sea. So that whole region now has become, in effect, famous for that.
And of course, from a literature's perspective, you have Abraham, it says hastening in this translation early in the morning. Obviously, hastening early in the morning is connected to other events like the resurrection and things like that. So you have the punishment coming at the night, and then the next morning is where it's getting resolved. And it's just a pattern throughout. It happens again with Abimelech, the in the morning, the resolution, right? The you have the dusk to dawn, and considering all the work was written for a very agricultural based society, it makes sense. You know, you get your work started when the morning starts. At the end of the night is when things kind of settle down.
There's somewhat erratic behavior on the part of Lot. I can understand, though, the traumatic environment. First he wants to go to this little town, and it's called Zoar, has to do with being small. There's a related word in Hebrew that we use for being young. Pardon me. So he wants to go to this little town, and so he's told it's going to be spared. But then he thinks, I guess, eventually this town's also going to be destroyed. Maybe because once he got there, he saw that it was not a particularly righteous place, and so he then flees to the mountains. So to me the behavior is somewhat erratic.
It is, and of course things degrade rather quickly there too. And the account is interesting in that, like a lot of things in the Bible, it leaves things open. And I think there's a narrative reason why we have a specific thing here that's not mentioned, and that is they get to this cave, right? And then immediately they say, well, let us give our dad wine to drink. Well, where did the wine come from? There's three possibilities, right? Either they brought it from them to Sodom and Gomorrah, which is kind of a symbol of they left the town and they didn't leave the sin behind because of the way the wine is used. I'm not saying wine isn't always negative in the Bible. In the context of this story, the wine is a representation of sin, right? Because it's used negatively. You also have, even in the case where they're in the cave, perhaps there already was wine there because people stored wine in caves back then. So where you go to hide, sin will find you. But then there's a third option. Perhaps there was some divine intervention that created wine to be there, and it wasn't just happenstance. They actually were tested and they failed, perhaps. But those are all three different reasons why you encounter sin. And I really find the thing that's fascinating is it's a refute of both concepts, right? Because people will say a way to avoid sin is, well, get out of the cities. You know, urban cities are just full of decrepitness. But here you have them going off into the middle of nowhere and immediately it degrades anyway. So the example to me is both extremes are not beneficial to you necessarily, or the problem is with us, not with the environment, perhaps. I don't know. What do you get out of that?
Yeah, it's true. It is plenty of you know inappropriate things that go on, out in the country too, for that matter. I kind of thought, as my son was speaking, you can take the people out of Sodom, but maybe you can't take Sodom out of the people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I wanted to mention that these women would have probably known that there were other human beings around. They had just been in that small town, and evidently it still existed. Um, I read one commentary that felt that they considered that since they had come out of a place that had been totally destroyed, that they would have been considered cursed by others, and nobody would want to have anything to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
So when they said no man's going to come, it's not that they thought that they were the only ones left alive on Earth, but they thought that they would just not, nobody would want them, was possibly the idea.
It's interesting, and it's just another account of people continuing a family line through their own way, their own cultural, how they think it's appropriate to handle, and not the way that God would intend. Um, Now, what's interesting about this, and both situations, because it kind of reflects what's happening with Abraham and Sarah, because Abraham and Sarah, you have the situation with Abraham and Hagar, and then you also have Sarah almost falling into adultery with two other men. So that's messy, right? And then you have this messiness, and from both of them, eventually, you're going to have the line of Jesus, right? Because you have Moab, and isn't Ruth from Moab? Is that correct? Um,
That's right.
yeah.
Ruth is from Moab.
Right. So, and what's interesting too with this is that you have virgins, right? And they're going about all this sort of stuff. Um, to some degree, I think there's a humanization to the process of us getting to the Messiah, because you have this example, you have, Abraham, you have Rahab, you have Ruth, Tamar, you have messy stuff all throughout it. And I feel like it's so unfortunate, and this is a little controversial, I suppose, but you have the concept of like the Immaculate Conception, right? Because that's not in keeping with what the Bible is saying. The Bible is saying these are human beings, and they have their flaws all the way up, and it's not until you get to Jesus that you actually have, that's the difference, right? Up until then, these are just people, and they continue to just be people, right? And I think we should not, even though I think we should have the most respect for Mary, we need to classify her as a human being just like everybody else. And I think to not do so really interrupts the narrative in a way that it's not intending. It's intending for it to be rough until we get there. Anyway, that's how I think about it.
I was going to say a moment ago that here you have the origin of two nations that interacted with Israel through its history, Ammon and Moab. But then my son brought in the very brilliant insight that Moab actually figures in the messianic line. So that's very interesting.
Well, it's especially interesting, like I said, because of how messy this is. There, you could go even a bit further. Let's go a little bit further because why not? The name Moab, right? It comes from the I've gotten from the father, right? Which is kind of weird because it's like, would you really want to be so explicit about it? Well, you could interpret it as that it's an honesty about the messiness of it. So to some degree, that does allow for a little bit of the idea that the Messiah that would come, that would save us from our sin, would come from somebody who acknowledged the process along the way. I don't know. You could go there if you want. If you like it, use it. If not, that's okay. That's just something that I was thinking about when I read it.
I think I lost you.
In the, in the case, it is interesting that even though Abraham had that experience in Genesis 12, that it's repeated here. So um, it may be that because she was his half sister, he felt justified in doing this a second time. And here he does say that I just didn't think that you people, uh, had the same moral standards, and I did feel like my life was in danger. Um, he talks about that he didn't see a fear of God in that place, but evidently there was some, and God even appears to Abimelech here, which is really interesting.
It's kind of a good point, right? Because I think sometimes if we I don't want to call it like self-righteous or something, but if you assume the worst, sometimes the worst happens in a situation when it's not necessary. You can assume some basic morality. I mean, even Romans talks about the fact that people can derive certain moral conclusions because it's in the system, it's in the air, it's you can observe nature and come up with systems. So and be law obedient without realizing that. So sometimes I think we have to understand that even if somebody isn't a quote unquote believer, that doesn't mean we're just reaching a bunch of Cro-Magnons or something. Like it's not. We need to be better about that. In terms of though the repetition, it is interesting, right? Because especially because there's a lot of that in Abraham, because you have the being told that you're going to have the kid a whole bunch of times. You have this, and in this story, he even makes it seem like this was just kind of their normal course of action. It's like, well, we made a deal that this is what we would do. So who knows how many times that this happened without these sort of ramifications based on that. Seems like that was kind of their MO.
So evidently, it took a while for him to restore Sarah, or it talks about women not getting pregnant, and that's something it takes some time to notice. That's one challenge with this account as to how long this process took place, because it mentions that in verse 18, for God had closed up all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. So it may be that not until he he gave a lot of here he talks about in verse 16. He then to Sarah he said, behold, I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody. Thus she was rebuked. So she was rebuked for going along with it. But at the same time, it seems like until he recompensed Abraham for what he did, the matter wasn't settled. He had to in effect pay for what he almost did, and maybe it comes to me maybe why, because what happened here? I mean, here's a pretty beautiful woman, and they just take her, and so maybe this kind of was a way of saying this is not how you treat people. You're a king, but you don't just see a beautiful woman and just take her. That like Ahasuerus does in later in history, and as I guess many VIPs have done over history. They've just abused their authority in that way.
I have a different theory. My theory is so we had the conversation a few episodes ago. Whatever chapter that is, what, 12?
12.
Yeah, 12. Where the Pharaoh does it, and there was speculation as to what the plague was, and specifically says plague Pharaoh, and there's a potential that it was some sort of impotence thing. It could be the same situation here, that when it says the wombs were closed up, it may not be that they were not getting pregnant. It could be activities were not being allowed to take place that would get them pregnant, which would be noticeable much easier. It would also be a more clear punishment to what you were saying, that this, get a grip on yourself. This is not just the thing. Don't be so ruled by your sexual desire that you see somebody beautiful, you just take them in, and that's how you go. It's possible. It's possible that it's just being maybe a little delicate or something about that. It's possible.
Well, the implications are rather serious, because if in fact Abimelech had taken Sarah, then Abraham had been promised that he would have a child through Sarah, and that was his dream. That was Sarah's dream. So perhaps Abraham figured, well, God will work this out some way. Uh, you know, because as I said, once the Abimelech takes her, then what happens to the promise that Abraham's going to have a child through Sarah?
There's another thing. This is from Robert Alter, because he says Maimonides takes that approach of impotence, but also that other Hebrew commentators have said that the one reason why they like the idea that he was rendered impotent is that there should be no doubt that Abraham is the father of Isaac, and so therefore the fact is that such acts could not have taken place, or somebody might have wondered about such things, and obviously for a man, especially when the whole point was to capture this beautiful woman, if they were medically prevented to do what they wanted to do, then obviously that's going to trigger a lot of alarm bells in a hurry.
Well, evidently Abraham had faith that God would work it out, but his strategy was inappropriate. Maybe that's one way to put it.
And yet he seems to come out financially for the benefit yet again. So it's kind of interesting. Any other comments about this portion before we move on?
Well, as I recall, in verse 21, for Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. As I recall from my youth, the focus, Sarah conceived a son and bore Abraham a son to make sure, no, it's not Abimelech's son, it's Abraham's son. You know.
And getting to what I said before, that may have very well been impossible anyway. All right, so I hope you're enjoying this. We got a little sexy today, so that was fun. Like, subscribe, hit the bell if you're enjoying this. Tell your friends. And if you want to read ahead, feel free to do so and leave some comments below. Otherwise, we will see you tomorrow.